It was the dead of winter in Macomb County, Michigan, and the frigid air had sunk deep into the bones of everyone who dared venture outside. Snow clung to the sidewalks and rooftops like an unshakable shroud, disguising any disturbances to the ground beneath. It was February 14th, 2007, Valentine's Day, and while most couples were preparing for a romantic evening, a grim revelation was unfolding in the suburban community of Washington Township. Police officers gathered around a modest home on Middlebury Lane where a man named Stephen Grant, father of two and husband to a woman missing for nearly 2 weeks, had just admitted to a horrific crime that would send shockwaves across the country. His confession had pierced through a veil of lies and manipulation, exposing not only a brutal act but a chilling descent into darkness behind the closed doors of a seemingly average American household. Tara Lynn Grant had not been seen since February 9th, 2007. She was a 34-year-old successful business executive, a consultant for Washington Group International who traveled frequently for work, often flying back and forth from Puerto Rico. Her career demanded long hours and long distances, but she remained devoted to her 2 young children and maintained a home in the suburbs with Stephen, her stay-at-home husband. The Grants appeared to fit the ideal suburban mold: 2 beautiful children, a nice house, and a couple that, to outsiders, seemed to be living the American dream. But under the surface, tensions had been mounting for years, their marriage fraying under the weight of resentment, jealousy, and unspoken anger. Tara's disappearance had first been reported not by Stephen, but by her employer. Concerned colleagues reached out to authorities when she failed to return to work or answer messages. When police contacted Stephen on February 14th, he gave a conflicting account of events. He claimed Tara had arrived home late on the evening of February 9th, following a business trip, and after a heated argument, she left with an unknown person in a dark car and never returned. He made her sound cold, calculating, perhaps even irresponsible, painting himself as a devoted father left in the lurch. But the inconsistencies in his story raised red flags for investigators. Why hadn't he reported her missing? Why was there no evidence of her leaving the house? And why, despite his claims, had no one else seen her since her return home? As detectives began probing deeper into Stephen's version of events, his demeanor became increasingly erratic. He gave media interviews where he tearfully pleaded for his wife's return, portrayed himself as a loving father and wronged husband, and criticized law enforcement for not doing enough. But behind the scenes, forensic teams were busy gathering evidence, and what they found painted a very different picture. Traces of blood were discovered in the garage. Cadaver dogs signaled the presence of human remains. And when confronted with these findings, Stephen finally broke down. In a stunning turn of events, he confessed to the unthinkable. He had murdered his wife during an argument, dismembered her body in the garage, and disposed of the remains in Stony Creek Metropark, a local wilderness area not far from their home. What followed was a gruesome and methodical recovery effort. On that cold Valentine's Day, law enforcement personnel donned thick jackets, gloves, and boots as they trudged through the snowy woods of the park, guided by the disturbing details of Stephen's confession. They found a Rubbermaid container half buried in the snow, nestled among trees and brush, far from the jogging paths and picnic tables frequented by families in warmer seasons. Inside, they discovered a portion of Tara's dismembered body. Her torso, meticulously severed, had been preserved in the freezing temperatures, the air so cold that even the natural decomposition process had been delayed. Investigators were stunned by the precision and coldness of the act. This was not a crime of passion committed in the heat of the moment. This was controlled, calculated, and deeply disturbing. The discovery of the container sent shockwaves through the community. Neighbors who had once waved at Stephen Grant on the sidewalk now stood in silence, their eyes wide with disbelief. The Grant house, once a symbol of suburban normalcy, had become a crime scene wrapped in yellow tape and guarded by patrol cars. Reporters camped outside, capturing every grim update as it unfolded. Inside the home, investigators found more evidence that spoke to the horror of Tara's final moments. There were bloodstains in the garage, evidence of cleaning attempts, and, perhaps most chillingly, tools that had been used in the dismemberment. Stephen had cut up his wife's body while their children slept upstairs. What made the crime even more difficult to comprehend was the timeline. After Tara was killed on February 9th, Stephen had spent the next few days living in the house with her remains stored in the garage. He went about his daily life, tending to the children, giving media interviews, and pretending nothing was wrong. He had even told babysitters and friends that Tara was away on business, maintaining the illusion that all was well. When decomposition began to set in, he moved the torso to the park, but investigators would later discover that he had kept her head and limbs hidden in the house for several more days before discarding them in different areas of the park. His ability to function normally while living with the remains of his wife spoke to a disturbing level of detachment and control. It wasn't just that he had killed her, it was the methodical and remorseless way he had handled the aftermath. The medical examiner later determined that Tara had been strangled. During the confession, Stephen claimed they had gotten into an argument about her frequent work travel and the distance it was creating in their marriage. He said that during the fight, he snapped and put his hands around her throat, not realizing he was killing her. But forensic evidence contradicted this. There were signs of a struggle, bruising that indicated a prolonged attack, and defensive wounds that showed Tara had fought back. It wasn't an accident. It was murder. Stephen had planned the dismemberment, purchased tools ahead of time, and made multiple trips to dispose of the body. These weren't the actions of a man in shock or grief. These were the actions of a man desperate to conceal his crime and preserve the illusion of control. As the investigation unfolded, a more complete portrait of the couple began to emerge. Friends and family described a troubled marriage. Stephen had long resented Tara's success. While she rose through the ranks of her career, traveled the world, and brought in a substantial income, Stephen stayed home with the children, a role he had not embraced fully. He often complained that she was gone too much, that he was left alone to manage the house and the kids. Their dynamic had shifted from partners to adversaries, with Stephen growing increasingly bitter. There were rumors of affairs on both sides, growing hostility, and a breakdown in communication that had turned their once hopeful marriage into a battleground. In the end, it seemed that Stephen had become consumed by a toxic mix of jealousy, anger, and a need to assert control. The discovery of Tara's remains marked the beginning of a lengthy legal process, but in many ways, it also marked the end of the illusion that had surrounded the Grant family. Their story became a symbol of hidden violence, of the darkness that can exist behind even the most seemingly perfect facades. The case drew national media attention, not only because of the gruesome nature of the crime but because of the themes it brought to light: domestic violence, mental illness, gender roles, and the fragility of the family structure under pressure. In the days following the discovery, Stephen Grant fled. After confessing to the murder and providing details about the location of the remains, he disappeared into the northern woods of Michigan, sparking a massive manhunt. The image of him hiding in the snow-covered forests, surviving on cold snacks and evading police, added another layer of drama to an already horrifying narrative. When he was finally found, hypothermic and disoriented, he was rushed to the hospital and placed under guard. The escape had not been an attempt at freedom. It was a final act of desperation from a man who knew his life as he knew it was over. Stephen would later plead guilty to second-degree murder. His trial and sentencing brought closure to some, but for many, especially Tara's family and children, the damage was irreversible. Her life had been brutally taken, her body desecrated, and her children left to grow up without their mother and with the knowledge that their father had taken her from them in the most horrific way imaginable. The discovery of Tara Grant's remains was not just a pivotal moment in the case, it was a revelation of the horror that had been hiding in plain sight. It shattered the myths of suburban safety, exposed the lies that had been carefully constructed, and served as a stark reminder that true evil doesn't always wear a monstrous face. Sometimes, it smiles politely from the front porch, waves to the neighbors, and tucks the children in at night, all while hiding a deadly secret just beneath the surface. After the shocking discovery of Tara Grant's dismembered remains buried in the snow-covered wilderness of Stony Creek Metropark, the public's focus shifted to the man who had confessed to the crime, Stephen Grant. Initially seen by many as a grieving husband, Stephen's facade soon began to crumble as investigators and media uncovered the darker truth lurking beneath his calm exterior. The story was no longer just about a murder, but about the psychology of a man whose desire for control and deep-seated resentments culminated in a cold, calculated crime that shocked a nation. Stephen's childhood and background provided some clues. Born and raised in Michigan, Stephen had always struggled with feelings of inadequacy and a lack of purpose. While Tara soared in her career as a business consultant, Stephen had tried various jobs, never quite settling, before choosing to become a stay-at-home dad. Although many would see this as a noble choice for Stephen, it became a source of frustration. His identity seemed tied to Tara's success and to the image of the perfect family they projected. When Tara traveled frequently for work, often to Puerto Rico, Stephen was left alone to manage the house and their 2 young children. Those absences, instead of being times for independence or self-growth, became breeding grounds for jealousy and bitterness. He saw Tara as distant, cold, and increasingly unreachable. This perception, whether rooted in reality or in his insecurities, fed the growing rift between them. In interviews before his confession, Stephen had portrayed Tara as a woman who abandoned her family, one who prioritized her career over her marriage. But as investigators sifted through phone records, emails, and interviews with friends, a different picture emerged. Tara had been the primary caregiver when at home, juggling the demands of her job and her family with grace and determination. She wanted to maintain a balanced life, but the pressures of corporate consulting often kept her away for days at a time. There was tension, yes, but no indication she intended to leave the marriage. Friends described her as hopeful for reconciliation, willing to work through difficulties. Stephen's narrative was an inversion of reality, a defense mechanism designed to justify his own spiraling rage. The night of February 9, 2007, the day Tara disappeared, became the focal point for investigators trying to piece together what happened behind closed doors. Stephen initially claimed they had argued briefly, after which Tara stormed out of the house. But forensic evidence and witness testimony contradicted this version. Neighbors reported hearing loud banging and shouting around 7:30 p.m. Inside the Grant home, the sounds were described as more violent and prolonged than a mere argument. Police found blood spatter in the garage and evidence of a struggle, indicating that Tara fought fiercely for her life. During interrogation, Stephen's calm demeanor slowly gave way to desperation. He admitted that the argument escalated far beyond anything he had portrayed publicly. According to him, the fight was about Tara's frequent business trips and his feelings of abandonment. He claimed he didn't intend to kill her, but became overwhelmed with anger. The medical examiner's report revealed Tara had died from strangulation, a method requiring intent and force, not a momentary loss of control. Defensive wounds on her arms and hands indicated she had tried to fend him off. After killing Tara, Stephen's actions grew chillingly methodical. Instead of calling 911 or seeking help, he began dismembering her body in the garage, using a hacksaw and other tools. The precision of the cuts suggested he had planned this part of the crime in advance or was able to quickly compose himself to carry out the grim task. This was not a spontaneous act of violence, but a calculated attempt to erase all evidence. For days, he stored her remains in the garage, even as the smell of decomposition began to seep into the house. He maintained his daily routine, caring for the children and answering media inquiries with tearful pleas for Tara's safe return. Stephen's ability to compartmentalize his actions from his public persona baffled those who knew him. Psychologists later noted traits consistent with narcissistic personality disorder and sociopathic tendencies. He exhibited little remorse and demonstrated a grandiose sense of entitlement, believing he could control the narrative and evade suspicion. His manipulation extended to the children, whom he shielded from the truth, while subtly shaping their understanding of their missing mother. His lies were pervasive, but cracks appeared as the investigation intensified. On February 14th, after police uncovered more evidence in the garage and found a large Rubbermaid container buried in Stony Creek Metro Park, Stephen's facade broke down completely. His confession not only detailed the murder, but also the disposal of the body parts across multiple locations in the park. He described the process with disturbing detachment, as though narrating a mundane task rather than a horrific crime. The public recoiled in horror as details emerged. He had severed Tara's limbs and head, hiding some parts in the house and others in the park. Each act was cold, calculated, and merciless. Following his confession, Stephen fled into the woods, prompting a massive search involving dozens of officers and volunteers. The manhunt lasted several days, during which Stephen survived in freezing conditions, his mental state deteriorating rapidly. When finally apprehended, he was hypothermic and disoriented, yet still managed to offer little explanation beyond vague regrets and justifications. His escape attempt was viewed as a final grasp at control, but also as an indication of his inability to face the consequences of his actions. Throughout the legal proceedings, Stephen's behavior remained erratic. He alternated between admissions of guilt and attempts to minimize responsibility, blaming Tara's supposed neglect for his breakdown. The prosecution portrayed him as a manipulative killer who murdered his wife in cold blood, while the defense tried to argue diminished capacity and emotional instability. Ultimately, the evidence was overwhelming. He pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 50 to 80 years in prison, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The impact on Tara's children and family was profound. They were left to grieve a mother taken violently and a father whose betrayal shattered their lives. The case sparked broader conversations about domestic violence, particularly how it can be hidden behind closed doors in affluent communities. Advocates pointed to the Grants as an example of how jealousy, resentment, and mental illness can culminate in tragedy if left unchecked. Stephen Grant's psychological unraveling was as much a part of the story as the physical crime itself. It revealed the dangers of unchecked rage and the lengths some individuals will go to maintain a facade of normalcy. His manipulation of public perception initially cast him as a victim, but ultimately exposed him as a predator, hiding in plain sight. The timeline of Tara's murder, from the argument to the dismemberment to the disposal of her body, painted a grim portrait of a man driven by obsession and control, willing to destroy everything to cover his own guilt. The Tara Grant case remains a haunting example of the complexities of domestic homicide. It shows how appearances can deceive, how psychological wounds can fester beneath the surface, and how one moment of violence can irrevocably alter many lives. In the years since, her story has served as a cautionary tale and a call to action for better recognition and intervention in domestic abuse cases, emphasizing the need to look beyond the surface to protect the vulnerable and prevent similar tragedies. The disappearance of Tara Grant quickly evolved into one of the most intense and closely followed criminal investigations in Michigan history. Within hours of her being reported missing, the local police launched a full-scale search and investigation, aware from the start that this case involved much more than a routine missing persons report. Tara was a respected business consultant, known for her intelligence, kindness, and dedication to her family. The idea that she could simply vanish without a trace sent shockwaves through the community. As the search intensified, so did media attention. Reporters descended on Rochester Hills, a suburb of Detroit where Tara and Stephen lived, eager for any clue, any word from the family. Stephen Grant, in the immediate aftermath, was portrayed as the anguished husband, desperate for his wife's safe return. With tearful pleas at press conferences, he painted a picture of a happy family torn apart by a sudden tragedy. His public composure earned him sympathy, and many were quick to rally behind him, donating money and offering support. However, behind the scenes, law enforcement was growing suspicious. Small inconsistencies in Stephen's story, combined with the physical evidence found in the home, began to tell a very different story. Officers noted bloodstains in the garage and the house that didn't match accidental injury or minor disputes. The timeline Stephen provided didn't align with witness statements about noises and activity in the neighborhood. Gradually, the investigation shifted from a missing persons case to a suspected homicide. The discovery of body parts was the turning point. When officers found Tara's severed hands, feet, and other remains hidden in a storage container buried beneath the snow in Stony Creek Metropark. The reality of the crime became undeniable. The grisly details horrified the public. Questions raced through everyone's minds. How could someone dismember their spouse? What kind of person could commit such a brutal act? The media dubbed it the Rubbermaid murder, referencing the plastic container used to transport the remains. As the news spread nationally, the story took on a life of its own. Cable news channels covered every development, rehashing every detail, interviewing experts in forensic science and domestic violence. Talk shows debated Stephen Grant's motives and mental state. Some commentators speculated about underlying issues of control and rage that may have driven the murder. Social media buzzed with theories and speculation, with some expressing disbelief that such a crime could happen in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Throughout the media frenzy, Stephen Grant remained a central figure. His public appearances were scrutinized closely, with body language experts analyzing his demeanor for signs of guilt or remorse. Some argued he was a grieving husband trapped in a nightmare, while others saw a cold, calculating man who had carefully planned the crime and manipulated the public. His fluctuating statements only fueled the controversy. At times he seemed cooperative and repentant, at others, defensive and evasive. The investigation itself was a massive undertaking. Hundreds of officers, forensic experts, and volunteers combed through the forest, the Grant home, and surrounding areas for additional evidence. Forensic pathologists worked painstakingly to identify remains, reconstruct the sequence of events, and determine the cause of death. The forensic analysis revealed the precision with which Tara had been dismembered. The cuts were clean and methodical, indicating the use of sharp tools and a level of familiarity with anatomy that suggested premeditation. In parallel, investigators examined the couple's personal lives. Interviews with friends, family, and colleagues revealed a marriage fraught with tension beneath the surface of public appearances. Financial pressures, conflicting ambitions, and Stephen's growing insecurities about his role in the family all contributed to an atmosphere ripe for conflict. Some friends recalled heated arguments, others described Stephen's controlling behavior and mood swings. Tara's frequent business trips became a source of resentment for Stephen, who felt increasingly isolated and unappreciated. As the evidence mounted, Stephen's legal team prepared for the inevitable trial. The prosecution's case was strong, supported by physical evidence, Stephen's confession, and witness testimony about the couple's troubled marriage. The defense sought to present Stephen as a man overwhelmed by emotional turmoil, claiming diminished capacity and arguing for a reduced charge of manslaughter. They highlighted his attempts to care for the children after Tara's disappearance and portrayed the killing as a tragic accident that spiraled out of control. The trial itself captivated the public. Courtroom seats were filled with journalists, family members, and local residents eager to witness the proceedings. The prosecution painted a chilling portrait of a husband consumed by jealousy and rage, who murdered his wife in a fit of fury and then attempted to cover up the crime through calculated dismemberment and disposal. Graphic forensic evidence was presented, including photographs and detailed testimony from medical examiners. Stephen's defense was emotional and poignant at times, focusing on his struggles with mental health and the pressures of the marriage. His attorneys argued that he was not a cold-blooded killer, but a man who made a terrible mistake under extreme stress. They called upon expert witnesses in psychology to support claims of diminished capacity. However, the jury was not swayed by these arguments, finding the evidence of premeditation and deliberate concealment overwhelming. After several days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on second-degree murder charges. The judge sentenced Stephen Grant to a lengthy prison term, ensuring he would spend decades behind bars. The verdict was met with a mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that justice had been served for Tara and her family, and sorrow for the tragedy of a marriage destroyed by violence. In the aftermath of the trial, the story of Tara and Stephen Grant became a cautionary tale about the hidden dangers of domestic violence and the devastating consequences of unchecked anger and resentment. Advocacy groups used the case to raise awareness about signs of abuse and the importance of intervention. Law enforcement agencies reviewed protocols to better detect and respond to domestic disputes that could escalate to homicide. The media coverage of the case also sparked debates about the role of sensationalism in reporting tragedies. While many agreed that the public had a right to know about the crime, others criticized the intense scrutiny and speculation that sometimes overshadowed the victims and their families. Ethical questions arose about balancing public interest with respect for privacy and dignity. Tara Grant's legacy lived on through her children, who grew up without their mother but with a growing understanding of the complex emotions and realities behind the headlines. Family and friends worked to preserve her memory through scholarships and foundations aimed at supporting victims of domestic abuse. Her story became part of broader discussions about the need for mental health support, family counseling, and community resources to prevent similar tragedies. The investigation, media sensation, and trial that followed Tara Grant's murder remain a poignant reminder of how appearances can deceive, how ordinary lives can harbor extraordinary pain, and how the search for truth can expose the darkest corners of human nature. Through the combined efforts of law enforcement, the justice system, and the community, a measure of justice was achieved, but the scars of the tragedy would endure for many years to come.